Hey, good evening. Welcome to live stream at the Upper Room. My name is Ron Strand, and we are glad that you are joining us tonight. We have a very special show because we're going to be reviewing and talking with the legendary, and he won't like that moniker, the legendary Chuck Girard, and talking about his new biography, Rock and Roll Preacher. I've got a copy right here, and it's a great read. We're going to be getting into that. But just a little bit of housekeeping before we do. Hey, if you're joining us for the first time, welcome. And for those of you who join us all the time, we hope you enjoy these live streams. We want them to be informative. We want them to be spiritually enlightening. We want them to be educational. And so we try to get a cross-section of different guests, from musicians to Christian comedians, people of note in the Christian community. We've done some political commentary as well. And so we hope you enjoy it. And if you do, would you like us on Facebook if you haven't done so already? And would you subscribe to our Facebook or our YouTube page? And would you also tell friends about us? Spread the word for us. We'd love for others to join us and to enjoy these shows as well. Tonight, let us know where you're watching from. Just type it in and tell us where you're watching from. We always like to know where our audience is. And we are going to give some time tonight for questions, one-on-one questions with Chuck. So be thinking of some questions. You could even type them in now, and we're going to get to them. We're going to do our best to get to them. The funny thing is, people write in comments, but we don't get a lot of questions sometimes. But this is a great opportunity for you to type in a question, something that you've always wanted to know about Chuck, or about his life, about his ministry, about his musical career. And this is a time for him to answer it firsthand for you. Hey, get a little bit about upcoming shows on this is next Monday, April 5th. We're going to have comedian Scott Wood, and we might have another guest available that night. We're working on something. But comedian Scott Wood, he's called Mr. Punchline, a very funny man. He's been at the Upper Room a number of times, and if you've seen him, he's a riot. So that's going to be a great time. Monday, April 12th, we're going to be hosting John Michael Talbot, singer-songwriter John Michael Talbot. And that's going to be a wonderful time. May 24th, we're jumping ahead to May. We're going to have the legendary Dennis Agajanian with us, and we're looking forward to that. Some of the upcoming events that we're also working on that we haven't nailed down dates for is Pastor Jack Hibbs from Calvary Chapel, Chino Hills, Amir Safadi, if you follow him, and Governor Mike Huckabee. So we're working on these. Are all the folks that have agreed to do the show. We've just got to nail down a date, and we're going to let you know when those things come up. So, hey, thanks again for watching. Tag a friend right now so they join in with us. I talked a little bit about rock and roll. See, everything's backwards here. Rock and Roll Preacher. This is Chuck Girard's autobiography, From Doo-Wop to Jesus Rock. And I'm going to welcome my dear friend, Chuck Girard. We're going to let it. There he is, Chuck. Okay, we don't have audio. Okay, we're barely hearing you, Chuck. So we're working on that. So while we work on that, I'll do a little soft shoe here. Oh, I know what I want to tell you. Hey, if you haven't got official Upper Room paraphernalia, apparel, the Upper Room, the coveted Upper Room ball cap, it comes with this black with gray embroidered lettering for the ladies if they like a little bit of gray and pink accenting. And then we have the standard khaki with some black lettering. These are $15 a piece. Write us if you want one. Write us and let us know. We're happy to accept more than that if you would be so willing to make a donation to the Upper Room. We are a nonprofit, by the way. We don't make a point of asking for money during these live streams. But since I've got a little bit of time, I'll go ahead and do that. We operate totally on a donation basis. And if some of you who may not be familiar with the Upper Room and what we do, The Upper Room started in 2009 as a concert ministry, if you will. We are an independent ministry. We're not part of a church, but we are a 501c3 faith-based organization, and we offer these concerts on a donation basis. I don't want to say free of charge, because we want people to be able to come and donate whatever they feel that they can donate. And so we've, by God's grace and his mercies and his provision, we have operated for over 10 years now on that basis. And we have been prevented from meeting since last March because the venue that we utilize is not our own venue. We lease a venue. They have not allowed us, they've not have cleared us to go back in and have meetings there yet. Otherwise, we would be there. We would love to get back into our once a month, Saturday night, live concerts because they're just a lot of fun. We're based in South Orange County, California, for those of you who might not be in the area or out of state. And they're just a great time. Our venue seats about 300 people. It's a very intimate time, very intimate evening. And we've had so many different folks there over the years that I know that you would know. And some of the legendary people of Christian music. And so we're anxious to get back to that. But as I started, we do operate on a donation basis. And I'd bring Chuck back in right now, but it looks like they're having some difficulties. And Marisa, my producer, is working diligently right now and trying to getting Chuck back on. And what's a live stream without some technical problems, right? But donations, we operate totally on donation basis. If you would be so kind as to give us a donation, we would be so grateful. And you could go to our website page, which is theupperroompresents.com, which is theupperroompresents.com. And you'll see a donation button there. Also, while we're off, I'm going to talk a little bit about a project because it relates directly to Chuck Girard. Is the documentary on the group Love Song that myself and Tommy Coombs, Chuck Girard, Jay Turax started about a little over 3.5 years ago. It started as a live concert at the Upper Room with Love Song. We decided to film the concert with the intent of putting a live DVD out of the concert. As things happen and as things evolve, it has evolved into a full-length documentary film on the group. And it's a wonderful piece that we are in the process of. We're in post-production right now. Mostly all the filming has been done. We have some notable people in this piece from Michael W. Smith, Jeremy Camp, Phil Keggy, Franklin Graham, oh gosh, we have so many people that have contributed. There's Chuck back. The picture looks a little bit worse, but I don't know if we've got audio. Do we have audio? Still no audio there, Chuck. I don't know if you could hear me. So we're going to keep working on that. So no audio. So Marisa, if you could go ahead and take Chuck out of the picture while we're trying to do this. He looks like he's a lost person groping to find something. So we'll work on that. What was I talking about? The Love Song documentary. So many great people have contributed to this, and we are in post-production. Boy, I feel like I'm hat in hand again tonight, but we are also looking for funding for that. We have self-funded, and so many people have donated so far. But when we turn this into a documentary, the whole thing changed a little bit in terms of budget. So if you would go to, here's two things you could do. You'll get to see a 5-minute trailer clip of part of the documentary. If you go to lovesongtheband.com, and you'll see a place where you could click on and watch the trailer and see what the great footage we've got in that so far and what the kind of a flavor of what it's going to be like. And you could also donate to the project. We are looking to raise about $150,000 $75,000, I think, at this point, which is not a lot with regard to doing a documentary. So obviously we've spent a considerable amount of money so far to get to where we are, but the post-production has changed considerably because we've got so many people that contributed and a lot of editing is involved. And so that's where the cost has really come in, and some of the promotion that we're trying to do for it. Gosh, we're hoping to release this. I've been saying it, and I've said it over the years at the Upper Room for the last 3 years, that we're going to be releasing it soon. But those dates have come and gone, and because we have changed it so much, and so we're hoping to release it this year for sure, and we're working diligently on raising capital for it. And so you could be a part of that if you would so desire, and should the Lord lay that on your heart to help us with that, that would be wonderful, because it's going to be a great piece of history, and I know that you'll enjoy it. So as we're still trying to get Chuck back in here, let's see here. I'm seeing him on my screen. There he is. Chuck, can you hear me?
I'm here. I'm trying to get my phone.
I hear you.
Here.
Okay, I hear your audio's good, and actually your picture's good.
Better.
So
than it was.
Huh?
It's better than it was a minute ago.
No, it looks really good. I'm getting feedback, though. I don't know if you have headphones or something, but
yeah, I had my computer. The other computer was still on. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, let me see if I'm getting feedback. Okay, the feedback's gone. Yeah, it looks good. All right, we're
ready
there.
To roll. Hey, I was
welcome, Chuck Girard.
I was just giving you some practice in what they call.
Well,
stalling.
thanks, Chuck. I've had to ad lib here for the last 5 minutes, but that's okay. It's good practice. So
you're good at that.
Well, I don't know. I guess it's just a lot of baloney, but I did plug the Love Song documentary, and by the way, I should plug which we're going to be talking about tonight, the autobiography, Rock and Roll Preacher, Chuck Girard's autobiography, From Doo-Wop to Jesus Rock. Boy, I'll tell you, Chuck, this is one good autobiography. And I read a lot of autobiographies. And I told you this, I think, last week, a little bit on the phone, but I'm going to tell you again, the way, and what's amazing to me is that you didn't have a ghostwriter for this. You wrote this yourself.
Yeah, it took many years. Yeah.
I know you've been working on this a long time, and it's written so well. And the reason I say that, not only because it's just a fascinating story, but because the way you write it keeps drawing you in, and you don't go down a lot of rabbit trails that just kind of get lost. It's just great information, and it's written concisely in terms of, I don't mean briefly, but it just moves quickly, and it's just, it's a page turner, and so it's just a lot of fun to read. It's a great read. How are you feeling about it so far?
Well, candidly, it's a little bit weird to have it out, because after all those years of working on it, you're waiting to get it released, and then you get released. And I'm a pretty private person.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden I feel like, oh, everybody knows all my secrets. It's a little weird for me, but it's part of that. Hang on, I'm going to tell Paul I need to get a charger for the phone in case it goes bad. Yeah,
I'll set you up.
Okay. So anyhow, I think my battery's full, but we'll see.
Okay.
So anyhow, my original motivation to write the book was really about 30 years ago. I felt like the Lord told me to do it, and I fought a little bit. I said, well, there's a lot more famous people than me that probably have more interesting lives, but I felt he kept prodding me to do it. So I started out so long ago. It was on yellow legal pads before computers, before I had a computer. And then when I got a computer, I put it all into the computer and worked from there. And then the last 4 years or so, we really got serious about putting it all together. But my intent of the book is not so much that people get to know me, but that they get to know my story. And it's really just a long testimony. When I did finally put all the elements together, I thought it was pretty interesting. I thought, well, I'd read this, So
it's very interesting, and some of the comments that I'm reading on Facebook of people that have bought it are saying the very same thing. And some people are saying, "But I had no idea of your extent in the secular music realm before you came to faith and some of the experiences that you had, and I want to go into some of that tonight. But it's what I think is important, Chuck, is you were an individual used at a time when God moved during the Jesus movement, and used you mightily, you and the guys in Love Song, and then of course all these years with your solo career. And so it's an important piece, I think, for people to, because you've captured a good part of the history as well.
Well, I
And
appreciate that. If I might respond, I think that Love Song itself is sort of a iconic group in the sense that in a larger sense, I believe that we were sort of the role models. Larry Norman came along first. There's no question about it. And there were a lot of bands at Calvary Chapel when we got there. But somehow I think the Lord pulled our band into the public eye to sort of demonstrate what he could do through rock music. And so then by extension, I think my story is interesting too, and probably the only place that there could be another book written about the history of Love Song. I don't know who would do it, probably not me, but so at least it's got that documented, and the book was severely vetted. I was very fortunate that in all areas of my life, there were a lot of people that were involved in my life that were still alive. And what I would do is I take the pages that related to them and I send them to them. And I say, what do you think about this? Is this accurate? And do you have anything to add? There was one, he's now gone to be with the Lord, but our high singer, our tenor in our group of Castells, I remember that we were on American Bandstand, and it was a foggy memory to me. I remember that we were preempted by Kennedy's speech, and so we didn't get to go on live. They pre-taped it and showed it later, but I didn't remember any details. And I sent Joe the pages on it, and I said, well, his whole section, and he came back with, he knew. He said, we left on whatever March 16th of whatever, and we got to New York or Philadelphia.
Yeah.
And so I put it in his words in the book. I just said he tells it better than I do, and let him tell the story. So there's a lot of that. I let Tommy Coombs tell some of his story, and I felt that their own words would be better than me paraphrasing them. So the book is meticulously vetted, but you still get things wrong. I have no idea if everything's 100% accurate, but like the Brian Wilson story, if you want to mention it. But
well, yeah, we're going to get to all that.
Okay.
I'm hoping. So yeah, and I'll send you a list of corrections that I've been keeping on the book.
Thank you for what do they call that? The re-edit, or but when they do that sometimes.
The revised version.
Revised version, right? But see, I'm such a newbie at books. This is my first book, and probably my last.
It's an incredible read, and folks, you got to get out and get it. Grab it on Amazon or wherever, on chuckgirard.com. I think you can buy it there, right, Chuck?
We don't have it available there yet.
You don't?
We're working out ways to have it. I'm not even sure where you can get it totally yet.
Okay.
But yeah, as soon as we'll make announcements. Right now, it's all Amazon. I know a lot of people don't like to use Amazon and support them for their spiritual positions, but sometimes you got to do what you got to do.
Yeah, and you graciously sent me an advanced copy, and I read that. And then plus, because I read in bed a lot, and my wife doesn't like the light on, I downloaded it onto my phone, I think on iTunes. So I've been reading it that way too.
The book has black and white pictures because it was too expensive to do color. But if you get the Kindle version, it has all the cool color pictures, and there's some amazing pictures in there.
Yes, it does. So the book, you go into, you start off with a great story, but then you go into your early life, and I know you don't want to spend a lot of time on that, but you had lost your father very young, an abusive father, which I'm sure shaped a good part of your upbringing and your adolescent years and so forth.
Definitely.
You talk about your dad had a severe drinking problem and was very abusive. And you have one story in there where he took you to see a car wreck, I believe, on a bridge in LA somewhere, and held you over, and you remember this. It
was a frightening memory. I remember getting stung by a wasp the first time too,
Is that right?
So those kind of things are so traumatic, they ingrain in your memory. and I can still see the truck at the bottom of the river, Devil's Gate Dam in Pasadena, and
Yeah.
it was a red truck with the wheels all alop, and of course the guy died. I guess I was too young to know all that, but yeah, it was a pretty scary thing. Yeah.
And he passed away when you were only 4 years old.
Right.
And then your mom remarried once, and you had a stepfather who was kind of a toe the line kind of guy, right? And,
Yeah, he didn't know how to be. He was not a warm person. It wasn't his fault. It's just how he was, a Germanic background, and
yeah,
here he was. You know, I have my older sister, and then my younger sister. He got all that baggage with my mom, and he didn't know how to cope. You know, he didn't know how to be a dad, and so it was very strict kind of a thing. When we moved to the ranch up in Santa Rosa, the little small ranch, 7 acres, you know, it was like you got to work and
yeah,
do all your chores for you. It's in the book, of course. Well, we're just
yeah,
kind of repeating some of the things in the book, but
yeah.
so I had that kind of an upbringing. I was in San Francisco till I was about, I think I was about junior high age when we moved to Santa Rosa. So my 12, 13, 14-year-old years there were pretty, what's the word? Legal, full of rules, full of
Yeah.
responsibilities, more responsibilities than a
Stringent.
young guy should have. Yeah.
Yeah,
Because he was, you know, he was a good guy. He provided for, he wasn't a drinker at all. So he was, in that regard, he was a good husband and father, I guess, but he just didn't know how to cope with a bunch of crazy kids.
talk about your mom a little bit. She was in your life, obviously,
Right.
a steady influence in your life.
Well,
How was
very, well, my relationship was touch and go with her. She, on one hand, she was very approving of me, and on the other hand, not so approving. And so it was
Mhm.
always this struggle to please my mom. And she was pretty unstable for most of my life, as I saw. She was responsible enough. She had got a little job and made sure we were supported. We lived in my
Yeah,
grandfather's house. Well, not a little bunkhouse in the back. But she was kind of off the rail. She was a real weird kind of almost a hippie seeker, you know, and she'd
yeah.
read tea leaves and read cards and things. And she was into that kind of stuff. I don't even think she knew what it was. It was just something to do. And but yet she practiced that, thinking that it was a real thing and that she could tell your fortune. Or I remember when I came to her, I said, "Can you tell mine?" I was probably about 10. She said, "Oh, you're too young to tell your fortune." So she
Yeah.
must have taken it seriously. But she was really emotionally unstable, and there were periods of my life she had never seen my youngest daughter. She died. My mother died about 10 years ago, and Nikki's now in her 30s, and my mother had never seen Nikki. She would
Wow.
cut off relationships with us because she didn't like that we were at Calvary Chapel. She didn't like our brand of Christianity, and she'd get real upset and she'd say, "Don't call me." And of course it was on her terms, and
Wow.
so we stopped communicating with her. And one time that went on for 5 or 6 years. Then she'd write you a letter, still the days of letters, and she'd say, "Oh, I was gardening in the backyard," and that was the signal, you know, you could get back in touch with me. But it's sad to me that she never got to see Nikki, and never really had a relationship with my girls. But the thing I was notable about, for me, reading the book back, because I'm doing the audiobook myself. And so when I got to those chapters on my mom, I felt, wow, I kind of threw my mom under the bus. And I even asked a couple of my kids read it, and I asked my sister, I said, you know, did I do that? I didn't feel that way about my grandparents, and I didn't feel that way, you know, about certain relatives. But my mom, I felt like I depict her as too harsh, because she really was a loving woman, you know, and there's a lot of that contrast in a lot of people's families, you know. You kind of see it. It's kind of an odd description, but you see it in some of these mafia movies where they go out and they murder 15 people and they come in and they go to First Communion, you know.
Yeah.
It was very, very widespread range of emotions growing up under my mother, and of course with my dad dying, she was a single mom. But it was, yeah, it was really a relief to get out of there. About 17 years of age, I got kind of
Yeah.
emancipated. They didn't have that in those days, but it was literally the
Yeah.
same thing. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, for what it's worth, I don't think the way you handled your mother was disrespectful anyway. I thought it was actually very, very done very well. I mean, you spoke honestly about who she was, and I don't think you disrespected her in there. But of course, you're going to be more critical on yourself. But I thought it was handled very well.
Thank you. Well, I'm settling into all those things and realizing it's the best telling of the truth that I know, so it's okay.
Yeah. So those early years, and particularly, I guess, up in Santa Rosa, you got the music bug, and you, like it says in the song "Rock and Roll Preacher," when I'd get home, or how does it go? The lyric
When I was
said it
young,
might,
my life was rock and roll music.
yeah, yeah, and so that really was kind of how you described that. You learned the
Yeah.
piano, and you took a few lessons,
Mm-hmm.
and you learned it, and then you hooked up with some guys. And so, talk about the early the doo-wop groups that. And what's interesting, Chuck, and we'll kind of get into this a little bit more, but the people that you interacted with back in the day, there's some very influential people. Most notably Brian Wilson, and you had several interactions with Brian over the years. Gary
Right.
Usher, who was a co-writer, and was he a producer for the Beach Boys? Or
No, he never produced them. He just wrote songs with Brian, and
yeah,
but they were tight friends. Yeah.
yeah. But you guys started a little group in high school,
Yeah. Yeah.
the Castells. Or
Yeah. Well, go ahead. Sure.
no, I just kind of setting it up.
We were just a bunch of guys that loved doo-wop and modern. We were a little past the hardcore doo-wop. It was starting to get into a little more like sophisticated recordings, but still doo-wop kind of bass stuff. And so we would practice in the choir room when we were supposed to be learning our choir parts. And we actually decided, let's be a group. We didn't even know how to sing harmony when we first started. We all sang the
Wow.
backgrounds in unison because we didn't know how to split the chords up, and figured all that out. And we had I think maybe our first gig at a local, they called it a canteen. It was a teenage hangout somewhere in town. And we weren't very good. This is my
Really?
first taste of perform. Well, not really, because everybody was nervous, and but that's when
Yeah.
we decided to call ourselves the Castells. But anyhow, through one thing led to another, and we met I don't actually remember exactly how, but we met a local DJ named Dan Dillon, and he worked at a station in Santa Rosa called K-Jax, and so we became friends with him. He had connections in Hollywood, and he said, "Why don't you guys make a demo? You're pretty good." I guess he'd heard us at a couple of, we play Elks clubs and stuff. And so we went down to San Francisco. We made a little demo for $100 that my mom gave us, and went down to Hollywood armed with his contacts and our demo. And we actually went to Aladdin Records, which was really more of a R&B kind of a, if you now you're afraid to say, more of a African American label, okay?
Yeah.
And
There's a lot of soul music, and
we were excited that they were interested. We thought, wow, that's pretty cool, because we considered that we had that soul thing. We didn't, but we thought we did. But anyhow, we went to see Herb Newman over at Era. Now, Era was really hot at that time. They had an older hit was "Wayward Wind" by Gogi Grant, and
yeah.
later on "Mission Bell" by Donnie Brooks, and "Birds and the Bees." So they were already doing pretty well. And Herb he took us in the office, and he heard our demo, and then he told us, he said, "I've just signed my roster. I like you guys, but maybe I can sign you later, but go ahead and pursue record deals, and I'll give you advice." But around that time, a guy came in that was a really well-known songwriter, a guy named Billy Sherman, and he had a publishing company with a guy named Barry Dvorzan. And Herb said, "Hey, I want you to hear this," but he left us out outside the room. So they were in there for about 20 minutes, and Herb comes back out, and he says, "Boys, I've changed my mind. I think I want to sign you." So he must have talked him into it, Billy Sherman. "Hey, don't let these guys go. They have a sound." And so that's how we got our first record contract. And then our fame grew locally in town, because eventually, when we did actually have a single on the radio, we became local stars, and then it was starting
Yeah.
to happen. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So you got a little taste of stardom there early on.
Yeah.
So who were some of the influences back then? Would it be like the Frankie Valli and the Four Seasons kind of thing? Or
Oddly, my biggest single influence in vocal backgrounds, people would think, oh, the Beach Boys, and they certainly were an influence.
Yeah.
Brian Wilson revolutionized my whole world. But there was a group called the Flamingos, whose most famous record was "I Only Have Eyes for You." That people
Yeah.
shoot up, you know.
Yeah.
And they had a record out called Flamingo Serenade that was a doo-wop reworking of old standards, Where, When, and Begin the Begin. That record was so ethereal, and the harmonies were so amazing on that thing that I just got like, I thought, oh, that's like music of heaven is really what I thought.
Yeah.
How did they get that sound, and what are they doing? And so that really stayed in the back of my mind through all my production days. Then when I heard Brian, of course, I started getting into more Beach Boy type thinking, although I never, as a Christian artist, ever consciously thought of, let's do this like the Beach Boys. It just happened that the way I think was similar to the way Brian thinks, although he's much more advanced than I was musically, but I would do things that way. And because we would sound a little bit like them, even Love Song does in spots, people would say, oh, they sound like the Beach Boys. But
Sure.
yeah, that's where all that. So I'd say them. And then to kind of wrap up the question, I always jokingly say it used to be the three influences were the three Bs: Bach, Beethoven, and Brahms. Mine were the band, the Beach Boys, and the Beatles. That's pretty much wraps up and when you say an influence, as a songwriter, I don't copy. I don't sit down and think, how can I write this like somebody else? I just think in my own groove, but you can't help but be influenced by your influences. That comes out in your thinking because that's what you were raised on. Everybody's like that, I think. And it's hard to get away from that. There may be a few artists that have established a completely different sound, but even the Beach Boys, the Beatles, the White Album was a bunch of sound-alikes, USSR like the Beatles, like the Beach Boys, and Rocky Raccoon like somebody else. So it's just natural part of our musical growing up.
Well, I've always thought your music and your writing was unique, even though there was hints and tinges of reminiscent things of like the Beach Boys in there. But it's always been, to me, very unique, and it's your own style. So, I know that you were influenced by Brian Wilson, and you tell the story in there that actually, you actually guys came out with a hit record, or a record on the radio, I guess, before they were even on the radio. And tell that story.
Just by a sliver. Yeah.
Just by a sliver.
Well, as you know, I copped out in the book a little bit, but I'll explain that to the folks here. But yeah, back in the days, we were all starting out. The Beach Boys, they were about 3 weeks away from really their first record, which was Bump Bump Dip 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 Surfing, I think. And so they were on the promotional, circuit because they were signed at that time to somebody, and we all did these sock hops where we lip sync our records. You'd appear live, but you didn't actually sing and perform. You just lip sync, and then the kids could see you in the flesh, so to speak. So there was this group, turned out to be the Beach Boys, that was playing there. I'd never heard of them, and one of them, I thought, all these years I've told the story that it was Brian, but then when I got to write in the book, I thought, if I had to swear on a Bible in a court of law, my memory is so old that, because I didn't even really know who they were at that time.
Yeah.
So I put it in the book that it is true that one of the Beach Boys came up to me and asked me for my autograph. And that was my first connection with them. And I said, what do you call yourselves? Oh, the Beach Boys. Okay, that's cool. Yeah, we have a record coming out pretty soon. And then their record came out and they skyrocketed, and I didn't really I didn't get next to them at that point. Then I met Gary Usher the same way at Sock Hop, and he was beginning to do Brian Wilson type stuff, surf hot rod music. He would get a record contract for one album, and then he put a studio crew together, and he asked me if I wanted, then they complete the album, and it was Now There's a Time.
Yeah.
So he asked me if I wanted to make some extra money, and I said, sure, and I came down to the studio at Capitol the first time, and it was Dick Dale was the session, and the Deltones. And
King of the surf guitar.
Yep. The king of the late Dick Dale, sadly.
Yeah.
But so I just, that night I sang background on a few songs that I don't remember what anything was at this point. Some of it I remember, some of it I don't. Very minor thing I did that night though, but it kind of gave me the taste. I earned some money, and I went away and I had a good time in the studio. So then Gary later on, he liked my voice, and he said, well, why don't you take on lead? We were all in the union at that time. He said, you make triple scale. Well, that's pretty good, but I'm under contract. Well, even Brian's doing it, Surf City is half Brian for Jan and Dean.
Yeah.
and he's getting away with it. Nobody's going to bother you. So I started singing lead for him. And for about 4 years, I was in his studio crew. We did movies, we did all kinds of albums. I was most of the time the lead singer. And out of that, then, this may be one of your later questions, but came the Hondells thing. We would deliver the album. That album was delivered to Mercury, to Nick Venet, the first producer of the Beach Boys, who moved from Capitol to Mercury by this time. And he said, well, it's either going to be the Hondells or the Rising Suns. And so we said, well, you pick it. So then the next thing I hear is the record on the radio. I didn't even know it was released. I'm driving down the street and I hear the track. And we cut lots of tracks in those days, so I didn't immediately recognize. Well, I didn't play on the tracks, but well, sometimes I play piano. But so I'm thinking that's familiar to me. And then I heard my voice, and it was Little Honda. And I called up Gary and said, hey, I heard our record on the radio today. Yeah, it's out. It's a big hit. At that time, it was climbing the charts. He said, yeah, they're going to give us Hondas if it goes to number 10, which they never did. But or it gets to number 1 or something. I don't know. That was the promise. But I never made any actual royalty money off any of that stuff. But I did get a gold record for Little Honda. But that's how I met Gary. And through Gary, reconnected with Brian, because I'd already met Brian at those sock hops. And he actually remembered me. And then he agreed to, he was looking for projects and outside the Beach Boys. They had a great success, and he wanted, I guess, stretch his wings. So one of my, a manager of, I don't know I think it was the Castells manager at the time, not my solo manager. His secretary was in the Honeys, which was Brian's wife and her sister, and Ginger Blake, who was the secretary. Brian recorded them as the Honeys. They had one kind of a sort of a hit called Surfing Down the Swanee River. And so through her, Mike contacted Brian and said, would you like to produce the Castells? Well, of course, he knew us. He knew who we were. And he agreed. And then we cut the song I Do. So that's when I really started to get to know him. And then we all became connected more as friends with Brian and some of the Beach Boys. And we all would play baseball. We'd go out and we play. Brian was a great hitter. He was a great ball player. So we were in a baseball league. And so I got closer to them than I ever had with any other famous group. And by this time, I was wanting his autograph, as the tables turned.
Talk about Brian Wilson, because you and I have talked about this over the years, and we're both huge Beach Boy fans.
Right.
You're so much more of a musician than I am, and you're able to recognize things. But
now,
come on, But a lot of people have written off the Beach Boys over the years as just kind of bubblegummy, kind of surf music. But people don't really, a lot of people don't really realize the genius of Brian Wilson. Talk about that and what makes him so unique.
Well, the depth of the Beach Boys is not found in the hits; it's found in the albums. And specifically, I guess it's not my favorite Beach Boy album, but everybody's pet sounds. My favorite Beach Boy album is Beach Boys Today, that has When I Grow Up, and still maintains their kind of that little rhythm sound they used to. And the Pet Sounds is very orchestrated and granted a great work of art. But the depth of even the simple lyrics, to me, you think about Surfer Girl or Fun, Fun, Fun. To me, that's just as important as or as laudable as Shakespeare, because he was reflecting his time in the what he lived, his life, in his songs, and they were by standards of great literature gonna stand up, but they reflected our lives, and that's what music should do. But the depth of the harmony and the music part is found in the other cuts they did, where they were just really going off into some amazing music. And I always feel like I don't think all my kids have the Beach Boy chip, and it makes me sad, because you miss out. It's a unique piece of American music that is really in its own category. And you can be a Beatle fan, and you can be a Stones fan or a Doors fan. But if you miss the Beach Boys because you dismiss them, then I think you're missing a great musical adventure. Because even when I listen to them now on Spotify, when they come on, like on a shuffle player or something, I marvel even after knowing intimately these records. I think, man. And then some of the stuff comes up where it's just the backgrounds or just the
Yeah.
tracks, and I go, man, Brian Wilson truly is a genius. And I'll tell you one little thing about that. I made the statement, Brian Wilson was one of there's about three people. I don't like to talk about secular music too much, but there's about three people I consider to be geniuses in music, and Brian is one of them. And I said something like, Brian is the only guy that's really worthy of the title of genius. And when they put out their Pet Sounds anniversary thing with all the stereo mixes and the background stuff, it was George Martin that said, Brian Wilson is the only living rock and roller so that cuts out John Lennon.
Yeah. Oh, living. Yes.
Yeah. Worthy of the title of genius. So I thought,
Wow.
I agree with you, So
Yeah. And George
Yeah.
Martin, the iconic producer of so many of the Beatles albums.
Right.
Revered in circles. And I think the other thing about Brian Wilson, I don't want to spend a lot of time on Brian Wilson because this is about you, but he was a genius in the studio. And as you've mentioned before, people in the Wrecking Crew who were incredibly well-known studio musicians in their own right would love to record with him. You got a cat climbing on your back there.
Yeah. I guess they're not watching the ship out there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Come on, buddy, get out of here.
But they would want to record with him. Hey, I want to move along because we lost some time up front. So, and there's a lot to cover here because I want to kind of touch on different parts of the book. Soon after your time with and kind of transitioning that time, you got into the drug culture pretty heavily. Mm-hmm. You talk a lot about the LSD, the acid trips that you went on, and I guess without going into a lot of detail in that, and without glorifying drugs, because I know you're very careful in the book not to do that as well. But
I gotta give the cat a little nudge here because Paul's gonna come in and get him.
Hey, Paul, how are you?
That's their kid. Anyhow, go ahead.
We're having fun. So, yeah. I guess one of the things that's hard for me to relate to, I never really I didn't get into drugs at all. I tried marijuana once in my life, didn't have a good experience. So I'm always intrigued by people who got sucked into the drug culture. But what was it that made you go, wow, this is good. I'm going to drop this tab of acid and see what it does. What intrigue was that you had?
Well, let me give you the headlines of the full kind of the progression. I started off with alcohol when I was about 15.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of a addictive personality in that regard. And so I went all the way. And I was pretty alcoholic even in the studio during the Castells and stuff. And I started to hear the buzz around I was probably 64, 65, somewhere in there, about this hippie movement thing. And one thing that really stuck with me was this picture in the Chronicle or something of a hippie staring into a light bulb as if he was seeing the universe. He's like, oh, man. And I go, like, what is up with that guy? He's got long hair like Jesus and a beard like Jesus. He's looking into So that image always stayed with me. And I was very curious about what was making these people go off onto that path. So I became more open to the idea. Now, the background is that drugs weren't open in the music circles in my days. People were doing drugs, but they were all kind of private. They didn't share weed in the studio and all that. And so somehow I got a hold of my first marijuana and felt like I discovered the universe or something. And I wasted all this money on booze when I could have been buying marijuana. And then after about a year of getting stoned on marijuana, I finally somehow got a hold of I believe I was in Las Vegas, and a guy in a band gave me a tab of acid. Well, I've always been even though it sounds like I say I'm compulsive and all that, but when it came to that kind of a drug, I was pretty careful because I knew it was extremely potent. So I took my first trip with about a quarter tab of whatever it was, and it was enough, believe me. And it took me into a place where this is tricky because the Bible says that Satan comes as an angel of light. and a minister of righteousness. And this all seemed like a world of, this is God's world. This is what it's really like. And I've got to see more of this. So one thing led to another, and I kept dropping more acid more times and having all these really great trips. There's also, I want to make sure people know there's pleasure in sin for a season, but the end thereof is death. And I know that firsthand. Okay.
Right.
So when I speak in positive terms about this, there's nothing positive about it at the end of the road. It's like any sin. It's fun for the moment, but it comes in and grabs you, and you're a slave to it. So I want to make sure I'm clear about that. So anyhow, this got me into connecting with a bunch of other people that were on what I would think was called a spiritual trip. And so we would drop acid, read the Bible, and one thing led to another. This is in Orange County, and there was one of the guys that was sort of the main leader of the Bible studies and all that. And he decided that Kauai, on the island of Kauai, was going to be the new Jerusalem, and we should all move there. And wait for God to come, So we did. We actually did that. And that's the part in the book where I talk about my yard sale, and we raised money and moved to Hawaii. And
I was dying when I was reading that too. I'm thinking, man, you gave everything away for nothing.
I did. I didn't care. I did. I just wanted to see the greed of man.
Yeah, right.
And so anyhow, we made it over to Hawaii, and that was not a good experience. We thought it was going to be this utopia, and really it was just, there you can't live off the land over there.
Right.
If you want to eat papayas and coconuts the rest of your life. But we had to go buy some, noodles and things and make food we could make last. But some of them burned out earlier. I stayed there for a while until Jay he was not on that trip with me. He had come over earlier to suss it out, and then he'd gone back to Salt Lake City and started his group. But all of a sudden I'm sitting on the beach, and this familiar, there's no cell phones in these days. There's nothing, right?
Right.
I'm just sitting on the beach doing nothing. I'm probably stoned. I'm playing my guitar, and here comes Jay Truax. Where did you come from? And he says, oh, I came over to ask you if you want to join our band. And so they invited me to come in. They had a very successful band in Salt Lake City. They had hooked up. They were going through real fast. They were going through Salt Lake City. They stopped to hear a group, I think it was Canned Heat, that was playing there the night. And they met the managers that had booked that show and told them they were a band, and they were going to Canada. And when they came back, they wanted to connect. The guy liked their band. He signed them, and they became very, very big in Salt Lake City. They were the band. They would open for people like Canned Heat and Janis Joplin and Three Dog Night. And so they were doing very well, but they were thinking maybe we could add a keyboard element. They were a power trio like Cream, with just a guitar, bass, and drums. And so they came over and got me and brought me back to Salt Lake. I was not a good enough musician to keep up with them, so it didn't really work. But I stayed in Salt Lake City for that year. And but as far as just connecting with LSD, I don't like to go too deep into it, because I've had situations where young people have, because of even our testimony and love song, have gone off into drugs. And one son of some very dear friends of ours died of drug overdose, and may have been influenced by our testimony. We were maybe a little too happy about our testimonies, how much fun it was, and then God saved us instead of seeing it as for the dark thing it was. So I'm very cautious about all this at this point, and that's why I always preface it with those scriptures, because I've also experienced the end, which is death. So that's the part you're not hearing right now.
A lot to cover here still. Your time's waning, but I had a lot of things I wanted to talk about with some of the bands that you connected with over the years, with Six the Hard Way, and then you connected up with Denny Corral, Virgil Beckham. They were a group called Fifth Cavalry, and then of course you met Jay. And then you talk about the Pasadena house, which was your mother's house. You took over the mortgage on it, and it basically became a hippie crash pad and music place. And that's when you talk about when you were going to go to Hawaii and you sold everything, gave it away. But you talk about writing the song "Feel the Love" there.
Right.
And you wrote in there, I consider it to be the first spiritually themed rock song that I ever wrote.
Right.
And that was something you went out on the back porch and talk about that a little bit.
Well, that was, it was a mixed bag of people that were hanging out. Actually, the famous drummer Jim Keltner lived down the street, and he would come to my keg parties. That's where I
Yeah.
first met him. People don't know who he is. He's a iconic drummer that's been on all kinds of John Lennon records. And
Yeah.
so there were a few people lived in the house, among them Jay Truax lived there, and I think George Grenier lived there for a little while. But people were coming and going all the time, and there was always music going on. We had a piano in there and a set of drums. We'd play all day long, get stoned. And my house was kind of going to the
dogs.
pits. Yeah. And I know, there's dishes stacked up in my sink, and the water wasn't going down. And so I decided, I got to fix this. And so I took the little U thing down at the end of the drain, and there was all kinds of gunk in there, and I had water falling out in the buckets. And I didn't know this till later. Jay said, that was me. I didn't know that. Somebody in the house, I thought, but it turned out it was Jay. He came in and said, brother, what are you doing cleaning your house? We're having a Bible study in here. Do you love your possessions more than you love God? And he shamed me.
Yeah.
So, but I didn't go back into the Bible study. I just said, well, I've got to, in my mind, I've got to clean this up. I can't live like this. But I was very, very sad. It was like, it just made me, this isn't right. It was maybe one of my first touches of this is going off the rails. This isn't working. So I went out in the backyard, sat on that step that's in the book, and I was playing guitar. I wrote that song, even as a piano song. I must have written an E on the guitar. Right. And I just started strumming and singing. Those words came out: save the sadness for another time, save the words for a song that rhyme. I was really just tired of there was a lot of haggling going on in the house over somebody's a spiritual giant and somebody's not. And so it wasn't the peaceful peace love thing that I'd expected. And that was maybe my first taste of disillusionment with the whole scene. There were many more to come, but that was probably the first.
And you were searching for spirituality at the time, but you weren't a believer when you wrote that song.
No, I wasn't.
So that's really.
I wasn't really officially a believer before I wrote half the Love Song album.
Yeah.
I didn't tell people that for years because I thought, they'll think those are Ichabod songs, and they didn't come from God. But I believe they came from God.
They came from God, obviously. God had his hand on you at that time. A couple of things that I wanted to touch on is when you go into the kind of the coming to Christ and so forth in a full way. And then you talk about meeting up with Tommy Coombs, and you have, as you said earlier, that he wrote a little section in there, how that came together. And I wanted to read that, but I think for sake of time, I'm not going to read it. And the reason I wanted to read it was because I just thought it kind of pulled together so many different people that connected, that became Love Song. But you guys got saved after you were living up in Laguna Beach in this house on the hill overlooking the ocean. And you met up with different people you'd pick up hitchhiking. I'm telling the story. I should be letting you tell the story, but I think I'm just trying to move it along because I want to get to a couple important things that I think. And folks, when you get the book, you're going to read all these things. So I know we don't have to touch on everything here, but you guys went from that place in Laguna Beach and you get saved, and then you go to what you call Bing's Garage, which was a little crash pad on top of Bing's garage, and just a rough framed room, 12 by 12, and you guys just all threw down your pads and your cots and slept in there.
Now you got sleeping bags.
But you talk about an encounter with Jesus, and where you wrote the song "Jesus Puts the Love in Our Hearts" in that during that time in Bing's Garage. Yeah,
you want to show that?
Yeah, would you?
Yeah. Well, we didn't really, we didn't know about songs birthed in worship yet, but we would get together and we wouldn't call it worship, but we would play our guitars and we'd sing, and we were freshly born again, just a couple of weeks old in the Lord. And Fred started playing these beautiful chords to the song, Jesus Puts the Song in Our Hearts. And, but here's the thing to note. everything we wrote was evangelistic. Anybody else would have written, "Oh, can you feel the feeling? His presence is everywhere." I wrote, "Hey, have you lost the feeling?
Yeah.
Can't you hear the music anymore?" Because to me, it was all music. Anything we wrote was to get other people saved. And then you go to the thing of, Jesus can change your life. And the last verse is, "Have you seen the changes? All your friends who have a happy glow. Don't you wonder what it is they know," or something like that.
Yeah.
And this beautiful cascading harmony came out spontaneously that night in the garage. And to the best of my memory, it was a Saturday night because we played it in church the next day. It was
Yeah.
really completely written in that time. And it was one of those special Holy Spirit moments that happened quite often after that, uh, where we'd write songs together. Most of our songs were not written together. I would write either by myself, or Fred Field would bring
Yeah.
me a guitar thing, and then I'd do the melody and the
Hmm.
words. But we did have a few that were spawned like that. And there's a couple on the first Praise album called "Bring My Body Closer" and "Praise the Lord" that aren't even uh, our name's not even on them, but they are truly us. They're actually love song cuts on that first Praise album on Maranatha. But we learned about bringing people into worship. I never considered. People say today, they say love song paved the way for worship, and I kind of can't see that, other than the fact that it was our goal to always bring people into worship. We weren't actually worship leaders in the traditional sense, but our music would draw people in the presence of God, and the anointing would flow. And our mark of a highly successful concert when there was no applause at the end, and people just walk out in the presence of the Lord. So we knew about worship, and we knew, but we didn't consider ourselves to be worship leaders, or that we wrote worship songs. We were really writing evangelistic songs, but
Yeah.
people would connect with them and they would be brought into worship. So, yeah.
Well, I've always thought that you've had a gift for, or certainly a heart of worship, and it reflects in so much of your music over the years. Um, that's just quite obvious. Um, you
Thank you.
One of the stories that I think is really cool in there is, you're driving along down in Newport Beach, I think, with Huntington Beach, with Lonnie Frisbee, who was a controversial figure, and I love the way you handled that in there. You handled it very well, um, because I got to meet Lonnie a few times, but not to where how in depth you knew him. But like it or not, Lonnie was a unique individual and a very gifted individual. And but one of the stories that you share is driving along, and he says, "Pull over. We're going to go over there and bring your guitar." And you go into some apartment. You just come in, and he says, "We're servants of the Most High God. We're here to tell you about Jesus." And everybody's in there, kind of getting stoned, and they're just looking like, "What in the world is this?" And you start playing your music.
Well, you're telling the story very accurately, but what was unique about it for us was that we'd never seen anything like this. This
Yeah,
guy, we thought he knew somebody up there,
right.
and he doesn't ask you. He tells you, "Get your guitar. We're going up here." It's
Yeah,
just me and Fred. So we, like you say, they open the door and marijuana smoke rolls out, and we're all gobsmacked. We're all kind of looking at them. I'm going like,
yeah,
"What's going on here?" And then Lonnie just says, "Love song's now going to play. Think about what Jesus said." Well, we weren't really love song. We were Fred and Chuck, but
yeah.
we sing the song, and then he preaches a very short sermon, and two guys raise their hand. And I saw those guys for years at Calvary Chapel. So it was a real conversion. And then I'd never got a chance to ask Lonnie this, absolutely have it come out of his mouth, but I can only surmise that he just heard the Holy Spirit say, "Pull in here, go up to apartment
Yeah.
14." That's the kind of thing that happened with Lonnie all the time. So I wanted to give him his due. And I know there's a lot of, in the book, I know there's a lot of controversy about his potential gay lifestyle and all that. I really researched it quite heavily. I know I never saw a glimmer of that when I was with him.
Hmm.
Uh, whether it was an actual problem in his life, I don't know. But I talked to people that did know, and I tried to treat it as honestly as I could in the book. And he was really written out of Calvary Chapel history for what they
Yeah.
called him the young man, because they
Yeah.
didn't want to identify with his name. But he was a troubled guy, but a lot of very gifted people are. But I believe we'll see Lonnie in heaven. I believe we'll see a lot of people that he led to the Lord in heaven.
Yes, yes, yes. Another funny another funny incident we talk about is you guys had gotten an invitation to play, and you said you'd go out and play anywhere during that time in the early years, and get an invitation to go play in Huntington Beach. You think it's going to be this highfalutin thing, and you get there, and these guys hand you these cheerleader type megaphones. They weren't even electronic; they were just the big cones.
Right.
And you walk down the beach and sing these songs at Huntington Beach, and you had couple of guys playing guitar, and you guys were singing. I mean, I'm trying to picture that when you wrote that. I'm picturing that experience. I'm thinking that had to be really awkward.
Well, the thing is, we do anything, so it was awkward,
sure.
but it was.
Right.
We did stuff like that all the time. We just
Yeah.
do whatever we could do to preach the gospel, but we did expect them that they would have some kind of a platform. We thought it was going to be an outreach, like we call it today, and there's nothing set up. There's nothing going on, and we asked the guy, what are we supposed to do? And he says, well, here, we're just going to walk down. He included himself in it. I guess he was going to preach or something, and gave us these megaphone things. But you can't play guitar and hold a megaphone. So the picture is so ridiculous. We're fully dressed. We're not in beachwear. And we're walking down, I'm holding my megaphone with another one for Tommy over here or something, because he's playing guitar. We're singing, think about what Jesus said to the sunbathers, who must have been like, what is going on here? Am I in a dream? But we did that kind of stuff. Now, I think we wound up on the, I think we did wind up on the pier, and we actually did more of a concert at that time. But those were things we do all the time. We didn't care. It was just, if we could get the word out, we'd do it. We were fools for Jesus.
Yes, indeed. And there's a song that's titled that somewhere, I think. Folks, we're going a little bit late, and if it's okay with you, Chuck, maybe we'll go just a few minutes more. Just there's some things I do want to cover in here. Folks, we're talking about Rock and Roll Preacher, Chuck's autobiography, just recently released. It's a must read. Go out and get it and tell friends about it, because this book chronicles not only Chuck's life, but a lot of the beginning of what happened during the Jesus movement, and it really paints a picture of the time. And so you've got to get a copy of this. And but Chuck, you struggled. Obviously, we talked about the drug era in your life, and then even into your Christian years. Of course, when you first got saved, in many years, you stayed sober and from alcohol and drugs, obviously. But the alcoholism crept back in, and you're very open about how you've struggled with alcoholism over the years. And how did that affect your ministry? And of course, I know it affected your marriage quite profoundly, and I want to talk about something there in a minute about that. But how was that? How did you rectify that contradiction of what you were dealing with?
Well, you don't at the time. You can only look back on it and see what was going on, because obviously it's a terrible hypocrisy that you're just, guilt and shame and all the stuff that goes with it. But it started off that, I couldn't justify drugs, but I could justify drinking alcohol, and I didn't do normal very well. I got born again, and I really believe I was delivered of drugs. But I had a kind of a cloud over my life, and because for the preceding 12 years, I'd lived on some kind of altered consciousness, alcohol or some marijuana. And so I looked for that loophole, and I thought, well, if I have a few drinks and I don't get drunk, I'm okay. I get a little buzz. I think this is one of the most important parts of the book, and I want to preface this real quick thing I'll do on it right now. I was struggling with whether to weave it into the narrative the way it happened. But I thought, the story is so victorious. I don't want to, it's not about my alcohol addiction. It's about my testimony of, not the love song part, is about the testimony of what God did with this group. So I waited, and I made it sort of like a last chapter thing. And, but I think it's an important part of the book, because people, they don't think anybody else they think if someone in my position or your position or a preacher's position, they don't have those kind of problems. Oh, they're living well, but you see people uncovered all the time that are going through all kinds of weird stuff not name names right now, but we're all aware of recent things that have happened with different ministers.
Sure.
So it's no secret that we're all sinners saved by grace. And, we, even though we shouldn't identify as sinners as Christians, we still sin. So one thing led to another. To make a long story short, it was that first 10 years, the 70s, it grew. I got married in 1971, so Karen went through most of this with me, the incremental increase in my addiction. And by the end of the 70s, in 79, I was a mess. And I was a walking, who is it? Chris Christopherson, a walking contradiction. And I felt very ashamed about it. I felt like a hypocrite. And yet I saw God anoint me when I go on stage, and I go like, what's up with that? And eventually I realized, looking back on it, that God still will anoint your gift. It doesn't mean he approves of what you're doing, in short. Okay.
Right.
So I went through a program, and I got sober, and 3 weeks of no drinking, and came out, and I was, from that point on, I was dry for about 17 or 18 years. I use the word dry because I had a guy challenge me once. He said, you say sober, it means you could have drank some alcohol, but you didn't get drunk. And I said, no, dry is what I mean. So that was, the first year was really miserable and hard. I was not motivated to do anything. I just got up in my bathrobe all day long. Maybe if I did get motivated by anything, it was 7 at night or something, and I'd spend a couple hours trying to write a song or something. I didn't know how to cope with being, without a coping mechanism. So I had this catharsis. When it started with my wife went in to see an old friend. His name is Henry Catrona, and I give him thanks for this. And he was just leaving. He worked for my wife's cousin who had a t-shirt factory or something. And he was going to leave and start a church, which he did, called the Hiding Place. And so he asked Karen, how's Chuck doing? And Karen is kind of private about protecting me, but she felt like, I'm going to tell Henry, not good, Henry. And she told him the whole story. And he said, well, he was kind of moving into the faith thing, a lot. And he said, well, Chuck's going to come to a day. I was already dry, but I wasn't doing well. He said, Chuck's going to come to the point where he's not going to have to confess he's an alcoholic, because they say that in AA, and encouraged her and prophesied a bunch of stuff. And then a little while later, I did go through an experience like that in a hotel. I won't tell the whole thing now because it's in the book, but I was in Toronto and Canada, and God got a hold of me, and I had this inner healing that was I get choked up now thinking about it. And God just reached down there and just delivered me again, and the whole black thing went away, the cloud and the darkness and the heaviness that I'd been walking under. And I was just, I shouted out at my parents and forgave them. I did all these weird things. And this was like a complete catharsis. And I was delivered really at that point from the, they call it in AA circles a dry drunk. It means you're still acting like a drunk, but you're not drinking. And so that was lifted from me. And that was the beginning of my Renaissance period around 1980, where I wrote the album Name Above All Names and had this whole new ministry open up to me in churches. And so that was like a huge moment. And then to complete the arc of the story, I was dry for 18 years. And then I started getting cocky. And I was going to Europe a lot. And in Europe, it's water to them. Pastors order beer when you go out to eat with a pastor. That's just part of their culture. So I thought, well, I'm healed. I'm set free, so I can drink like other people. And of course I couldn't. And one thing led to another, and I came back, and I got very quickly into the same zone I was. This was a much shorter period, though. The first period was about 10 years. This was about 2 or 3 years. And then one day I looked in the mirror, and it was my inner man that spoke to me, but God too. It's kind of hard to describe. I can't say God spoke because I know what that feels like. This wasn't exactly that. It was a combination of God and me speaking to myself in the mirror. You are a dead man, and you will not be alive in 6 months if you don't quit this. And at that time, I had no hospital, no deliverance. It was just, I stopped. And that was around late 1999. And I haven't had a drop of alcohol since. I can be around people who drink, and it's okay. But I want to add 2 things real quick. I always say I'm careful when I think I stand lest I fall, so I don't get cocky about it anymore. And the first time I did it for everybody else, and it didn't really work. It did for 18 years, but I went back to it. The second time I did it for me. I wanted it, and that's what put the nail in the coffin. And that's in detail in the book.
One of the things I want to talk about that I wanted to read a little excerpt from, because I thought it was very poignant and interesting, because one of the times that Karen, because she had gone through this with you and had coordinated an intervention with Chuck Smith and Ken Gullickson at the time. And you talk about going, even, you knew you were going to that, and you actually went comfortably buzzed in front of Chuck because you kind of knew what you're going to. But I'm going to read a little excerpt, and this is about your time in that meeting. It says, "At one point, I began to deflect the blame, citing all the factors around me that in my mind were really responsible for my addiction. I lashed out at everything I could think of. And at one point began to blame Karen. I was ranting on when Chuck spoke to me in a more stern voice than I'd ever heard Chuck Smith before, and never had heard him before or after. And he said something very similar, like, 'That's enough, Chuck.'" I could just picture that moment. But it was the authority and the finality in his voice that spoke. He had never spoken to me in that tone, and I realized at that moment I had no more power. Karen gave a final ultimatum: go to the care unit, which is the care unit in Canoga Park, or don't come home. I knew it was over, and I had no choice. And that was a pretty come to Jesus moment, I guess.
Trapped like a dog of a tree, yeah.
I mean, to have Chuck Smith speak to you, because Chuck obviously was a good friend of yours over the years. You grew up in the faith with him as your spiritual mentor and like a father figure. And for him to have him speak sternly to you, that must have been pretty sobering.
Well, I have to be, you can't, you read it the way you want to read it. Everybody does. But, the truth of the matter was very low key. I should have made this more clear in the book, because it wasn't, "That's enough." It was like, "That's enough, Chuck." But it was so authoritative, and it was so, God's power was behind it. He was saying, "You don't do that in my camp, under my watch." So it was, and that's the first time I heard that kind of a rebuke out of him toward me. So it was very dynamic. Yeah.
Well, there's so much more in the book that we're certainly not going to have enough time to get to, but that's why people need to buy the book and read all these things. You talk about the beginning of the vineyard, which actually happened in your living room out in the San Fernando Valley. Folks, we're talking about Rock and Roll Preacher, Chuck Girard's autobiography, from doo-wop to Jesus Rock. You've got to get this book. It's a wonderful book. But you talk about the start of the vineyard. You talk about Bob Dylan's. You talk about that whole Bob Dylan's coming to faith, and part that you played in where you were in that instrumental in that time. But there's so many stories in here that are just really quite amazing. And Chuck, you've written an incredibly well done autobiography. I have to compliment you on it.
Thank you. It means a lot.
Well, you know me, and you know that for years, from early time of my point of faith in 1976, you were one of the voices in terms of music that spoke to me so strongly. And for me, all these years later, to have a close friendship with you is quite a privilege for me. And this book is really, just an amazing piece that you've put together. I know you've worked hard on this over the years. All the time I've known you, you've talked about this book, and so it's finally come to fruition. Folks, you've got to go out and buy this book.
Can I just add too that if once people read it, if they can go, unless you didn't like it, don't do this. Okay, go to Amazon and review it, because that all helps us with metadata. I don't understand it, but it helps push the book forward. So
yep, absolutely. Go on Amazon.
But not if you didn't like it.
Yeah, if you didn't like it, don't say anything. If you liked it, tell me how much you liked it. Are the sales going pretty good so far? Is it?
Well, I don't know what to compare it to. I'll tell you. The last I heard, this was about a week, 10 days ago. Lisa calls me up. My daughter her book, by the way, has sold 50,000 copies. my daughter
Yeah.
Elisa's book,
Elisa.
Another Gospel.
Yeah.
And she says, "Dad, you're like 40,000 on Amazon." I said, "Oh, that's great." She says, "Dad, there are millions of books on Amazon. That's not bad."
Yeah.
And somebody said that I had that some way they measure it was I was 40 something, and then I was 20. This is not top 20. This is among the religious books too, so it's isolated to that. But I know that physically, as of 10 days ago, we had sold 300 copies. Now, I don't know whether that was Kindle with paperback combined, but for the time, it had only been out about a week, 10 days. So, but the initial rush is fast. If we're trying to get on some major TV shows like CBN and Huckabee, and if we get that kind of exposure, it'll probably go up exponentially. But I'm happy with it. It's God's my distributor. He'll get it in the hands of who he wants, and it was well worth doing. And if nothing else, my kids can read my story after I'm gone.
Well,
so.
yes, and we're not the biggest platform in the world, but I'm hoping tonight we could move the needle a little bit, because and I'm not just blowing smoke, folks. This is a great book. You've got to get it. If you grew up in faith around Calvary Chapel during the Jesus movement, you got to get this book. If you don't know anything about Chuck Girard, you've got to get this book, because it tells a story of an amazing journey about a young man who came to faith, whose journey went through drugs and Eastern philosophies and secular music, and it's just got it all. And it's not fluff or hype. It's just a great read. And so, folks, get out and get that book. Hey, as we close tonight, we're running a little bit tight on time, but I always want to let people know that if you need prayer, you could email us a prayer request, because we do pray for you at prayer@theupperroompresents.com. And we do pray for you. And Chuck, if folks want to get in touch with you, it's Chuck Girard give us the email address.
It's just chuck@chuckgirard.com. So
Chuck.
If you know how to spell my name, Girard. And that's not a business. That's my personal email. So we might have to change it after this book becomes so popular. But
well, I did read. Yeah, that's right. I did read. Somebody made a comment tonight that they got it on Kindle. I got it on iTunes. I think I was able to get it there and do the electronic download. And I do have a physical copy of the book. Folks, get out and get Rock and Roll Preacher, From Doo-Wop to Jesus Rock, Chuck Girard's autobiography. Chuck, thanks for doing this.
Thanks for having me, Ron.
You bet. And hey, folks, enjoy we've used Chuck Girard's music, and Chuck graciously gave us permission to use it for our bumper music to his song "Fresh Bread, Cool Water," and just the instrumental version of that as we go out. God bless you, folks. Thanks for watching. Chuck, thanks again for being with us.
Thanks, Ron.
Okay. Take care.
Appreciate
and God bless.
Thank you, guys.
You too.